Hello and welcome to Cryptid by State, Minnesota. Being it is the first Monday of the month, you knew it was time for another entry in our Cryptid by State series. To be honest, when I first noticed which area would be next, I was a little apprehensive, since I didn't think Minnesota really had any creatures of note. In fact, before making this video, I told my neighbor about what the topic was, and she even questioned what would be found here. After digging into the subject, I can say that I was happily very wrong in my original assessment. This location has quite a broad range of hidden creatures and even more fascinating tales. Not to mention that this is also the famed location of one of the most interesting UFO sightings involving an officer named Val Johnson. So, without further ado, get your bathroom breaks in now, since we are continuing our Cryptid Family Road Trip, where we are leaving the previous location of Kansas and heading north to Minnesota. Minnesota has a bit of a straightforward history, but it does get a little confusing during the consideration for statehood. Native Americans of the Mississippian culture called the land home for many years, and later the Dakota and Ojibwa tribes became most prominent. While it is somewhat debated who actually was the first Europeans to venture into the area, it is known that it was the French. Two fur trappers named Pierre Radisson and Mida de Gossière did come to the land in 1650. However, much of what was known about the area came way of a missionary named Claude Allouy, who created a map in 1671. It would be in this same year that France successfully established a treaty with many of the tribes to allow for trading. In the following years, many more French explorers made the trek, mainly for the goal of finding the famed Northwest Passage. With the Second Treaty of Paris in 1783 and the Louisiana Purchase in 1803, much of the land we know as Minnesota was acquired from the French. Although it is worth noting that the northwest part was considered a portion of the Wisconsin Territory, and the remainder of the land was included in the Iowa Territory. It wouldn't be until after Iowa and Wisconsin became states that Minnesota would encompass the remaining land as its own territory on March 3, 1849. This new landmass would include both North and South Dakota. Here's where things become a little weird. After much debate, on May 11, 1858, Minnesota officially became the 32nd state. Kind of. The eastern half did, but the western portion was unorganized and eventually merged into the Dakota Territory almost 3 years later. The flag of this state is quite unique, but it certainly has a lot going on when it comes to symbolisms. The banner has had a few variations since it was created in 1893, but it primarily depicts the state seal on a background of blue. In the center, we find a circle of 19 stars, which represents Minnesota being the 19th state after the original 13 colonies. The large star at the top represents the North Star and Minnesota, since it was the northernmost state at the time. Of course, below this we have the state's name, for obvious reasons. From there we find 87 gold circles, which are meant to represent the 87 counties in the state. Moving in a bit, we find 3 dates surrounded by a wreath of lady slippers, which is the state's official flower. 1819 is there for when the prominent Fort Snelling was created. 1858 is for when the land became a state, and 1893 is when the flag was created. In the center is the state's motto of L'Étoile du Nord, which is French for the state of the North. Okay, there is a lot to the state seal, so we'll go over them quickly. The 3 trees in the background are for the state tree, the red pine, and the water and falls of the Mississippi River and St. Anthony's Falls, which also symbolize early transportation. The stump in the foreground represents the importance of logging, and the plowed field is for agriculture. Within this are images of a plow, rifle, horse, spear, and axe, which symbolize the tools used for hunting and labor. Now, originally there was some controversy, since the man working the field was holding a rifle, and many assumed it was him chasing off the Native American. This item was removed at a later date, since the Native American on horseback was said to represent the people's heritage. Okay, we have a lot of cryptids to talk about. As stated at the beginning, this area has a lot of cryptids from just about all forms of the genre, except the Thunderbird, although the Ojibwa did have legends about them. There is only one water-based cryptid of note found here, so we'll get that one out of the way first. Probably the most famous creature found here is the one in Lake Pepin, known as Peppy. An accurate description can't be found, other than it isn't considered friendly, is fairly large, and some liken it to a serpent, while others say is more similar to Nessie. Stories about the creature were told from the early Dakota tribe, who were said to fear the beast. While utilizing canoes to cross the water, Peppy would sink the craft and eat the inhabitants unlucky enough to be in the water. Eventually, the tribe started using thicker, hollowed-out log canoes to combat the creature's attacks. In the 1600s, a French man named Father Louis Hennepin reported that he saw the being while standing near the shore. He described it as being serpent-like, the size of a man's leg, and around 8 feet long. Through the years, more and more reports emerged, but eventually they died off for some time. Then, in the 1970s, a local businessman named Larry Nielsen was out in the lake with his wife one night. He stated that there were no other boats on the water at the time. At one point, he saw a giant wake that was about 100 feet long moving against the current. Whatever was causing this disturbance was actually swimming above the surface at a height of 1.5 feet. At the time, Larry stated he wasn't aware of the legends of the beast, but learned about it after doing research following his sighting. So intrigued by this, he publicly offered a $50,000 reward for anyone who could provide him concrete proof of the animal's existence, of which he requires a good photograph and a portion of flesh that can be DNA tested. He admitted that he did this to drum up tourism, but does believe the creature exists. There have been many photos and investigations through the years, but no proof has been found. Although he was given a sonar reading from a fisherman, which showed some type of creature swimming under his boat that was 16 to 17 feet long. The next cryptid is typically one that is kept on the honorable mention section, but the sightings were too interesting this time. No, it isn't Bigfoot, but rather a dogman. The first sighting came from Todd County in the town of Long Prairie one summer. A man who wished to remain anonymous stated that he was staying at his mother's farm, helping her out. One morning he went out to hunt for squirrels, which was said to be plentiful. After having a successful hunt, he went to pick up the last of his catch. It was at this moment that he claimed to see a humanoid dog creature standing in a tree line. Even though the being didn't try to attack, its mere presence unnerved the man so much that he fired a couple shots in its direction. It let out a deep yelping noise and ran away. The man made it back to the house and called the police to report what he had seen. When the officers arrived, they couldn't find much evidence other than some larger than normal prints, but they insisted it must have been a wolf. The man remained unconvinced that this was the case, and later, when he told his mother the story, she gave the impression that she had seen the creature before. The next sighting was in mid-September of 1999 at Duluth Air Force Base. Again, anonymity was requested, but we do know that the event occurred to a soldier working as a guard on the third shift. Around 2:30 in the morning, he took his truck around the perimeter, checking that everything was secure. While near a field, he caught sight of eyes reflecting back at him. What was odd was that they appeared to be eye level with him, and he was sitting in a truck. The soldier heard reports of a giant buck being seen around the base, so he decided to turn off the road to get a better look at this creature. Just as he turned the headlights on, it jumped down an embankment, but not before he realized it wasn't a deer. Granted, he only saw the back end, but he said it was huge. It appeared wolf or dog-like, had thick matted dark brown hair, it had a long tail that was over 2 feet in length, and its back feet were enormous. He stated that the paws were bigger than his hands and much larger than any bear he had ever seen. In a moment of bravery, he stepped out of the truck with his weapon in hand and listened as it ran away. He claimed it was making a loud noise crashing through the forest. Eventually, he realized that if this creature was what he thought it was, then he wasn't sure his weapon would hurt it. So he returned to his truck and never spoke a word to anyone about what he saw for fear of ridicule. The last sighting is from Otter Tail County near Fergus Falls. In the fall of 2009, a man was traveling down Wendell Road at 6:30 p.m. when he came across 3 deer. Being a nature lover, he decided to stop his car and watch the animals. While enjoying the scene, his eye caught sight of something standing by a tree only 40 yards away. He claimed it could only be described as a humanoid-type wolf being standing there almost like it was hunting the deer. It was 7 feet tall, had a long protruding muzzle, broad shoulders, a skinny waist, and muscular legs. The creature had one hand on the tree, and the fingers were long and thin, and it even had an opposable thumb. Moments later, the deer ran off, and it was then that he noticed the dog creature was now staring at him. He said he couldn't shake the feeling that it was actually blaming him for losing his meal. Not wanting to be a replacement for the deer, the man stomped the gas and got away as quickly as possible. Later the next day, he returned to the scene and said he found a few canine-like prints that were 6 to 7 inches long and had 4 toes. Our last cryptid on the main topic is fairly short, but I couldn't help but include it on the main list. Apparently, there is a little-known sighting of Mothman in Rochester. Much like previous encounters, this appearance resulted in a tragedy, even though I personally don't think this cryptid causes them. On August 1st of 2007, rush hour traffic was underway on the Interstate 35 bridge. Suddenly, the center of the structure began to collapse, and soon after, the entire road was in the water. Sadly, 13 people lost their lives, and another 145 were injured as a result. After this event, reports started pouring in that people had actually seen a large human-sized bat-like creature with red eyes flying around the structure a month prior. In one such sighting, a woman from Illinois was traveling outside of Stewartville on June 27th and claimed she saw something odd on her travels. She simply described it as a large black bird that had a wingspan of a Ford. Again, this sighting was mere days before the accident occurred. I obviously don't mean any disrespect to the families that were affected, and my heart goes out to them. Yet, if the stories are true, then this would be just one more example of my favorite cryptid being around when something terrible was about to happen. As usual, I couldn't talk about every cryptid in great detail, so that is what our honorable mention section is for. It shouldn't come as a shock that Bigfoot is quite prominently found in this state. Sightings are from all over and include those in St. Louis County and the Hairy Man of Vargas Trail. Although I should note that the famed preserved Iceman was quite well known here before it vanished. I have a lot of thoughts on this topic, and quite a few viewers have requested I investigate it, so it is apt for a future video. Now, I will mention in passing that while we know where they stand as being a cryptid, I would be remiss not to at least note that there have been quite a few Wendigo sightings here. Before some listeners start typing a comment about what a Wendigo is, I know they are primarily a spirit entity. I am just mentioning them since they have been seen, and they can possess both spirit and corporeal forms. In the town of Rosal, reports of a 15-foot tall creature covered in white hair, has long fangs and glowing yellow eyes, has been brought to light, dating back from present day to 1880. It is quite possible that this thing isn't a Wendigo, but something new entirely. There are old reports of mermaid and merman-like people inhabiting Lake Superior. These beings have childlike bodies but adult features and are covered in dark woolly hair. The Ojibwa were said to call them Memegwashi, and they viewed them as gods of the water. According to lore, they are a mix between a typical mer person and a siren. So, in essence, they can be deadly. There is a famous story from 1782 involving a sighting from a merchant named Venet Saint Germain and his crew. Forestville State Park has had quite a few sightings of hellhounds. In a few of those reports, the creatures even tried to attack people who were camping there. Luckily, they managed to seek refuge in their camper, but it was said that the hounds did almost manage to knock the vehicle on its side. I saw vague murmurs of a troll supposedly being found near Cannon Falls, but who knows. Here we have a weird one, but certainly not a quote-unquote cryptid that hasn't been reported in other states before. This would be the phantom kangaroos found around Coons Rapids. At first, I was led to think that this was simply a normal marsupial that had escaped a zoo, but the more I looked into it, the stranger it became. Between 1957 and 1967, there were a lot of sightings, and it was given the cutesy nickname of Big Bunny. The problem is, this creature wasn't friendly, and was blamed for rooting through garbage cans and killing people's pets. If that isn't bad enough, apparently it had glowing eyes, and at will, could vanish from sight. Moving on, we have 4 oddities that fall into a couple realms of the paranormal. First is a being simply known as the Mystery Monster. In 2011, a weird hairless creature was found alongside the road near Alexandria. As you can see, his appearance is very similar to the famed Montauk Monster. While this creature is still known as the mystery monster, many are convinced that it was simply the remains of a badger. In 1995, there were sightings of a living pterosaur, but it didn't have much detail other than it was in the southern part of the state. However, in 2011, a report emerged that a group of 3 people saw a similar being over a swamp in the northern part of the state. It was said to have leathery reddish-brown skin without feathers, its head had a long crest, the beak was full of sharp teeth, and had a long tail that ended in a spade shape, and it was believed to have 3 toes. The creature was seen flying over a 2-lane road and was very close to the observer's vehicle. Next up is a being that is fairly likely made up, but I'll mention it for posterity. I saw a couple reports of a creature known as the Blotchwood Shambler. It is apparently very similar in appearance to a tall gray, or the more recent crawlers. Not much information is known, but as stated, it could simply be a local urban legend. Although a report from 2004 claims a man working the night shift at a cheese plant did see an oddly moving creature making its way through the cornfield one night. It was said to move in a jerky, robotic fashion, it had pale gray skin, was skinny, had straight long black hair, and was child height. When it came into view, the face wasn't human at all, so maybe this was the same thing as the Blotchwood Shambler, or someone was pulling a prank. Finally, we move on to 2 that are 100% fake, but I'm including them due to enjoying the old lumberjack tales. The first is known as the tea kettler. It is simply a mix between a dog and a cat that has the tail of a tea kettle and produces steam from its mouth. Apparently, it would only walk backwards, but could be located by its distinct whistling sound, very much similar to what it is named after. Last but not least, we also have the axe handle hound. This dog-like being has a long body and their head is shaped like the blade of an axe. As odd as it sounds, they were said to steal axe handles from logging camps at night and eat them. See, not every cryptid story has to be so serious. In ending this, I hope you enjoyed the video and that I made Minnesota proud. This topic really made me realize that we shouldn't ever judge a book by its cover. Remember to keep voting for which state you would like to see next in our Cryptid by State series by writing the name of the location in the comments section. As a note, I was recently invited to enter our channel into the Streamy Awards competition, and I'm seriously considering it. I don't have much information to add at the moment, but if I do submit something, I'm going to need your help showing the event how much you love the channel. If you haven't yet done so, do please consider subscribing to my channel for more content like this. Also, it would be greatly appreciated if you share my videos with someone you know who may enjoy this type of genre. With that, be safe, and I'll see you in the next one. Later!